It started when their golden retriever, Maple, met two bobcat kittens at the backyard fence. On the other side stood two tiny bobcat kittens, still babies, most likely twins. They lived in the woods behind the fenced yard. Maple didn't bark or lunge. She just stood there and watched. Then she took a step closer, then another. The bobcats didn't run. They watched her too, curious and calm. That's how it all started. At first, Tom thought it was just a coincidence. But when it happened again and again, it became clear there was something between them. A connection you couldn't really explain with words, but one you couldn't ignore either. And then it changed. They weren't just lingering by the fence anymore. Now they were outside the kitchen window, tapping softly at the glass like they were requesting an audience with their unlikely friend. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Tom Harris never expected that retirement in the Colorado foothills would involve explaining to the neighbors why there were bobcats knocking on his kitchen window. He and his wife, Ellen, had moved to the small cedar-sided house on the edge of town to get quiet mornings and birdsong, not to become the unofficial referees between wildlife and a golden retriever with more heart than sense. Yet that was exactly what happened. It began, as most complicated stories do, with something that looked very simple. Tom first noticed it one soft spring afternoon. Maple, their golden retriever, had finished her game of fetch and wandered toward the back fence. Usually she'd crash around like a moose in a flower bed, nose buried in the grass, tail swishing. But that day, she stopped dead still. Tom, rinsing coffee cups at the kitchen sink, saw it through the sliding glass door. Maple's body went rigid, but not in the tense, bristling way that meant a stranger's dog had wandered too close. Her head was tilted, ears lifted high. On the other side of the fence, half hidden among the chokecherry bushes, two small shapes crouched in the dappled shade. At first, Tom thought they were the neighbor's cats. Then one of them turned. The faces were round and serious, with tufted ears like little paintbrushes and spots speckling their sandy coats. Their paws, though still small, were too big for their bodies, and their tails were stubby with black tips. Bobcat kittens. Tom's breath caught. "Maple, stay," he called automatically, sliding the door open just enough to be heard, not enough for her to bolt. But Maple didn't bark or lunge. She simply stood there, tail making a slow, uncertain wag. One of the kittens rose with that floating, careful step of a wild thing, then another. They didn't flee. Instead, they walked toward her, right up to the wire fence, until there were only a few inches and thin metal strands between them. The little bobcat pressed its nose close, whiskers twitching. Maple leaned forward just as slowly. For a single suspended moment, they breathed the same air. Tom half expected chaos, a warning hiss, a swipe of tiny claws, Maple's instincts snapping awake. None of that happened. The kitten simply stared, golden eyes wide and curious. Maple's tail picked up speed, then slowed again, her body loose and relaxed. On the hill behind the property, a movement caught Tom's eye. A larger shape melted from the trees. The mother. She was lean from nursing, her coat a tangle of spots and scars. She watched them from a distance, dog, fence, kittens, with the unblinking focus only a wild predator can have. Tom's heart pounded. He'd spent enough evenings reading Colorado parks and wildlife brochures to know that bobcats were shy, mostly harmless to people, but very much wild animals. He didn't want to interfere. He also didn't want his dog, or those kittens, getting hurt. Maple glanced back toward the house, as if checking whether he was watching. Then she sat down. Right there in the grass, her nose still nearly touching the fence. The kittens copied her. That was how it started. Over the next few weeks, the visits continued. Tom and Ellen soon realized the Bobcat family lived in the narrow strip of woods that climbed the ridge behind their property. Tom began to recognize the mother's silhouette moving between the ponderosa pines in the early morning, as regular as the sun. The kittens, Ellen named them Briar and Birch, though they never got close enough to know who was who, appeared most often in the cool hours just after sunrise or before dusk. Every time Maple went outside, she made a beeline for the back fence. More often than not, two sandy shapes slipped from the brush to meet her. There was always that fence between them, and Tom was grateful for it. Maple would stand with her paws placed carefully, never pawing at the wire. The kittens would creep close, sniffing, ears tilted forward. Sometimes they stood there for long, quiet minutes, just watching one another, tails flicking lazily. Ellen, who had raised 3 sons and more foster dogs than she could count, watched from the porch with her hands wrapped around her coffee mug. "You ever seen anything like that?" she asked Tom. "Never," he admitted. They'd raised Maple to be calm around other animals. Living on the edge of wild country meant they got everything from mule deer to the occasional black bear nosing through the trash. From the day they brought Maple home as a fuzzy 8-week-old puppy, they had worked on leashes, recalls, and something Tom liked to call respect for neighbors with hooves. No chasing deer, no barking at elk, no harassing anything wild. Even so, this was different. Maple could be downright bossy with visiting dogs. She'd shoulder them away from her tennis balls and make it clear which patches of yard were hers. But with the Bobcat kittens, she was as gentle as a summer breeze. No growling, no stiff posture, only patient stillness and soft eyes. The neighbors began to notice too. One evening, Tom's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Ramirez 2 houses down. "Have you seen the Bobcat family today?" "We haven't, starting to worry." Tom glanced out the window where Maple was lying at the fence, nose pointed toward the trees, waiting. "Not today," he typed back. "I'm watching. We'll let you know." They did worry. All of them. Whenever a day or two passed without a sighting of the mother, text threads lit up among the little row of houses along the ridge. "Anyone see the mama today? Heard a coyote last night. Hope the babies are okay. Think we should call wildlife if she doesn't come back?" Tom thought of intervening more than once, but each time the mother reappeared, slipping silently out of the woods, her belly full, her step steady. Sometimes she lay stretched on a sun-warmed rock while the kittens tumbled around her paws. And sometimes, when Maple was at the fence, the mother watched quietly from the tree line, her yellow eyes calm. "She's not afraid of Maple," Ellen observed one morning. "She's checking that it's okay." Tom nodded slowly. "As long as they stay on their side, we stay on ours." Summer deepened. The kittens grew lanky, their kitten fuzz giving way to sleek spotted coats. Their paws, once comically oversized, began to fit their frames. They traveled farther into the woods, gone for days at a time. When they returned, they moved with more confidence, slipping between the aspens like shadows. But their routine with Maple didn't change. If they appeared while Maple was in the yard, they walked straight to the fence. Maple trotted over, tail swaying. They'd meet nose to nose with only the thin wire separating them. the three animals forming a quiet little triangle in the late afternoon light. Other deer passed through sometimes, or a lone coyote loped by in the distance. Those animals gave Maple a wide berth. She watched them with polite curiosity but didn't approach. The bobcats, though, they stayed. They grew up with her, Ellen said one evening as they watched from the kitchen. To them, she's just part of the landscape, a familiar neighbor. A very nosy neighbor, Tom added, watching Maple lick the fence as if she could somehow lick their whiskery faces. He took pictures, of course. At first, it was just to prove to his brother in Ohio that he wasn't making up stories. But the photos, Maple's golden fur pressed close to wire, the kittens perched on the other side, soon filled a folder on his computer. Despite the sweetness, Tom never forgot that the bobcats were wild. He and Ellen locked their trash, kept no outdoor pet food, and never, ever tried to feed the cats. The fence stayed up and Maple never went out unsupervised. They also called a local wildlife rehabilitator, a calm woman named Denise who had worked with everything from injured hawks to orphaned elk calves. "As long as you're not feeding them or trying to touch them, this is okay," Denise told them over the phone. "They're just learning that your yard isn't dangerous. The fence is a good barrier. Let Maple be calm and quiet like she's been, and the bobcats will probably move on more as they get older. But enjoy it while it lasts. It's rare to see them so relaxed. Enjoy it while it lasts." Tom didn't realize how quickly those words would come true. The first hard frost of autumn arrived overnight. Tom woke to find the world rimmed in silver. Maple's breath puffed white in the air as she bounded outside, her paws leaving prints in the glittering grass. The kittens, no, not kittens anymore, but young bobcats with lean muscles under their coats, were waiting at the fence. Tom smiled and went about his morning, pouring coffee, rinsing the breakfast dishes. He had just set a plate in the sink when a soft sound tapped at the window above it. Tap, tap, tap. He looked up. Two spotted faces stared back at him, framed by the glass. He almost dropped the plate. The window over the sink sat above the slightly lower backyard, its base nearly level with the top of the fence. One bobcat had hopped up, front paws braced on the narrow ledge outside, nose pressed to the glass. The second bobcat perched just below, paws hooked on the first strands of the fence, eyes bright. Maple, who had followed Tom back inside, stood on her hind legs, paws resting gently on the counter. Her eyes were huge, tail waving in slow circles. Tap. The bobcat on the ledge raised a paw and carefully tapped the glass again, claws sheathed. Not a strike, not an attack, just a questioning knock, the way Maple sometimes batted at the patio door when she wanted outside. Ellen stepped into the kitchen, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Tom, who are you?" She stopped. Oh my word. The four of them froze for a heartbeat. Man, woman, dog, and two bobcats staring at one another through a pane of glass. Then Maple's tail thumped, and she leaned closer, nose almost touching the window. The bobcat on the ledge relaxed visibly, shoulders dropping. The one below scrambled up beside its sibling, and for a moment both pressed their paws and faces to the glass, as if trying to get as close as possible to their golden friend. "They're knocking," Ellen whispered. Tom swallowed. They want to see her. That became the new routine. Every morning around 8, just as Tom finished his first cup of coffee and Maple's breakfast bowl clinked empty, there would be a soft, polite tapping at the kitchen window. Sometimes it was just one bobcat, sometimes both. Occasionally, on colder days, the mother appeared in the background, lounging on a sunlit rock, her gaze always watchful. Tom never opened the window when they were there. The barrier stayed firmly in place. But Maple would hop onto a little padded stool they placed by the sink and stand nose to nose with them, separated only by the glass. Ellen began narrating the meetings. "Well, good morning, boys," she'd say in her gentle Midwest drawl. "Come to check on your friend?" Maple's tail answered for her, sweeping back and forth like a metronome set to "delighted." Neighbors started hearing about it. A few times, Mrs. Ramirez came over with her grandson, who watched with wide eyes from the dining room doorway. "They really just show up," he whispered. "Every day," Ellen said softly, "just to visit." The heartache, when it came, was quiet at first. Late one November evening, as wind rattled the last of the leaves from the aspens, Tom heard the distant wail of sirens on the highway that wound through the foothills below. Living where they did, he was used to the sound. Accidents on slick roads, the occasional small brush fire. But that night, it seemed closer. The next morning, Maple went to the back door at her usual time, nails ticking on the tile. Tom opened it and watched her trot out, tail high. The fence line was empty. He shrugged it off. Wild animals had their own agendas. Maybe the bobcats were hunting farther up the ridge. But the next day, there was no tapping at the window. Nor the next. A week passed. Maple still rose every morning and went to the back door, pausing to look up at Tom with questioning eyes. He let her out and she would walk to the fence, stand there for a while, then lie down, chin on her paws, facing the silent woods. "They're probably just ranging wider," Ellen said, but worry creased the corners of her eyes. The following Sunday, Tom drove into town for groceries. As he waited in line at the checkout, he overheard two men talking near the magazine rack. "Hit it just past mile marker 12. Cat bigger than any house cat I've ever seen. Sheriff said it was a bobcat." "That the one they had to pull off the shoulder?" the other asked. "Heard it had kittens somewhere." Tom's stomach knotted. Mile marker 12 was exactly where the road came closest to their wooded ridge. He paid for the groceries and drove home with a weight in his chest. The moment he pulled into the driveway, Maple appeared at the back gate, tail wagging hopefully. She glanced toward the woods, then back at him. "I don't know, girl," he murmured, voice rough. "I just don't know." That night, Ellen sat beside him on the couch, her hand over his. "We don't know it was her," she said quietly. "There are bobcats all over these hills." Tom nodded, but the image of the lean, watchful mother bobcat on the ridge burned behind his eyes. Days turned into 2 weeks. The first snow came, frosting the yard in white. Still no tapping at the window. Maple's routine never changed. Every morning she stood at the back door, eyes bright with expectation. Every morning Tom opened it, and every morning she went to the fence and waited. The sight of her, golden fur against the stark winter grass, eyes fixed on the empty tree line, broke something tender inside him. "She misses them," Ellen whispered one evening, watching Maple from the kitchen. "She doesn't understand why they're gone," Tom replied. He didn't either. 3 weeks after the sirens, the phone rang just after dinner. "Harris residence," Tom answered. "Mr. Harris, this is Denise Palmer from Foothills Wildlife Rehab. You called me a while back about a bobcat family near your property." Tom straightened. Ellen looked up from the sink, eyebrows raised. "Yes, that's right," he said. "Is everything okay?" "I thought you might want an update," Denise said. "We had a female bobcat brought in about 3 weeks ago, hit by a car near mile marker 12. Tom closed his eyes briefly. "Broken pelvis, some internal bruising," Denise continued. "We managed to stabilize her. She's recovering well. But here's the thing. She had milk. She'd been nursing. So we knew there were kittens out there." Tom gripped the receiver. Did you find them?" "We weren't sure where to look," Denise admitted. "Then one of our volunteers remembered your call and the note about the family living behind your place. We've been monitoring the area from a distance. 2 juveniles, about 7 or 8 months old, have been hunting on their own up there. They look healthy." Tom exhaled slowly, the tension in his chest easing for the first time in weeks. "We've been watching them," Denise went on. "They've been hanging around your property line a lot, standing at your fence in the mornings." Tom's throat tightened. "Yes," he said hoarsely. "They used to come right up to the fence to see our dog. They've stopped coming to the window." Denise's voice softened. "We've seen that. They approach the yard, then retreat. My guess is they're being cautious with the change in their mother's situation. But I wanted you to know, the mother made it. She's still with us at the center. Once she's fully healed, we'll relocate her and the juveniles together to a safer area of the forest, away from the highway." It was the right thing, Tom knew. A safer home, fewer cars, more wild country. But the thought of their ridge suddenly empty, of Maple's quiet vigil at a fence no longer holding familiar faces, pressed on his chest like a stone. "Will we ever see them again?" he asked. There was a pause on the line. "Probably not up close," Denise said gently. "They'll be released a good distance away. It's better for them to stay wild. But you did something important, Mr. Harris. You gave them a piece of their kittenhood where humans and a domestic dog weren't a threat. That matters." After he hung up, Tom sat with Ellen at the kitchen table, the rehab center's words rattling around in his head. "It's the right choice," Ellen said softly. "I know," Tom replied. He looked toward the dark window where his reflection stared back at him. "Try telling Maple." The release happened in mid-January. Denise sent a short email with a photograph. The mother bobcat, sturdy and strong again, slipping out of a transport crate into a snowy meadow, her 2 nearly grown offspring at her heels. "Healthy and wild," the caption read. "Thank you for being part of their story." Tom printed the photo and stuck it on the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a sunflower. Still, Maple watched the fence. Her coat thickened with winter, a soft halo around her shoulders. She walked more slowly on icy mornings, pausing to sniff at every drift. Yet every day, without fail, she paused at the same spot, ears pricked, eyes scanning the empty woods. She doesn't understand release protocols, Tom joked weakly to Ellen one evening. His wife's eyes shone, and she squeezed his hand. "She just understands love," Ellen replied. Spring came late that year. When it finally arrived, it did so all at once, as if the whole hillside had been holding its breath. Snow melt rushed in little streams, the aspens budded almost overnight, and the air filled with birdsong. Maple was older now. White hairs dusted her muzzle, and she took longer to get up from her favorite spot by the window. But she still insisted on her morning patrol, nose taking in every new scent the thaw revealed. One bright April morning, Tom stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing blueberries for oatmeal. Maple sat on the padded stool beside him, watching the yard through the glass. A movement at the fence caught Tom's eye. Two shapes emerged from the trees. For a heartbeat, his mind insisted they were deer. Then one of them stepped into full view. Bobcats. Two of them. Bigger now, thicker through the shoulders, coats glossy with health. They moved with that same floating stride he remembered, but there was more power in it now, more wild confidence. One carried something in its mouth. As it drew closer, Tom saw it was a rabbit, limp but whole. "Ellen," he whispered. "Ellen, come here." She hurried in, drying her hands. When she saw the yard, she stopped, hand flying to her mouth. "Is that—" "It's them," Tom said. "Has to be." The Bobcats walked straight to the fence as if no time had passed at all. They set the rabbit down carefully on their side, then looked up at the window. Maple's whole body went still. Then, with a small grunt of effort, she stood, front paws braced on the counter, nose pressed to the glass. The larger of the two bobcats, Tom guessed it was one of the former kittens, now fully grown, rose onto its hind legs and placed its front paws on the narrow ledge outside the window, just as it had months before. Its companion settled beside the rabbit, tail flicking lazily. Tap. The paw touched the glass. Not a frantic scratch, but that same polite, questioning knock. Maple's tail began to wag, slow at first, then faster, her whole hindquarters shimmying with joy. She licked the glass, snuffling, leaving foggy smears on the inside. The bobcat's nose twitched in response. "They came back," Ellen whispered. "After all that time, they remembered." Tom felt something hot sting his eyes. He blinked hard, unwilling to miss a single moment. The second bobcat rose then, and Tom realized with a start that it was slightly smaller, with a faintly different pattern of spots and a softer, more rounded face. "Look," Ellen murmured, voice trembling. "That one's young." It stepped away from the ledge, and that was when Tom saw the third shape in the grass. A tiny bobcat kitten, no bigger than Maple's head, peeking out from behind its mother's legs. The little one crept forward, unsure, its movements quick and jerky. The larger adult stayed by the fence, eyes flicking between Maple and the woods, every muscle ready to bolt if anything seemed wrong. But Maple only wagged, eyes soft, body relaxed. Slowly, cautiously, the kitten climbed the fence and scrambled up onto the ledge between the two adults. It pressed its nose to the glass, whiskers splayed. On the other side, Maple leaned closer, her breath fogging the window. For a heartbeat, generations met. Domestic dog whose ancestors had hunted with humans. Wild cat whose blood remembered stone canyons and desert nights. Then, as if some invisible timer went off, the adult bobcats dropped back to the ground. One picked up the rabbit again. They gave the yard one last long look, eyes catching the morning sun, then turned and slipped back into the trees, the kitten bouncing after them. The whole visit had lasted less than 2 minutes. Maple stayed at the window long after they were gone, nose pressed to the glass, tail wagging in quiet circles. "They brought her a gift," Ellen said softly, voice thick. "That rabbit. That was a gift." Tom nodded, his throat too tight for words. The bobcats did not come every day after that. They were wild, with their own territories and lives deeper in the forest. But every week or so, especially in the early mornings, Tom would hear that familiar, gentle tapping at the window. Tap, tap, tap. And every time, Maple would be there. Sometimes it was just one adult, sometimes both. And as the months passed, the kitten grew, its steps less clumsy, its coat filling in with rich spots. They never stayed long, just a few moments at the glass, a quiet exchange of looks and slow tail wags, then back to the wild. Tom and Ellen never opened the window for them. They never fed them, never tried to touch them. The boundary remained, thin but firm, a line of glass and respect. To Maple, though, it was enough. On days when her arthritis ached and she moved stiffly, Tom would lift her front paws gently onto the padded stool so she could see. Her eyes would brighten the instant the spotted faces appeared, and for that brief time, the years seemed to slide off her. "You know," Ellen said one evening as the sun spilled gold across the kitchen floor, "if you told me 10 years ago that we'd retire in a house where bobcats knock on the window every week, I'd have said you were crazy." Tom chuckled, rubbing Maple's ears. "If I told my brother now, he still thinks I'm crazy." They watched Maple settle by the window, eyes half closed, nose pointed toward the faint scent of pine drifting in. "People think the world is getting meaner," Ellen murmured. "More divided. But then you see something like this. A dog and a couple of wild cats who just accept each other. No words, no deals, no expectations. Just quiet trust." Tom nodded slowly. "We don't always get to keep the things we love," he said. "But sometimes they come back just long enough to remind us that what we had was real." He glanced at the photograph on the refrigerator, the mother bobcat stepping into the snow, her body whole again. And then at Maple, her muzzle now mostly white, breathing slow and content. Outside, the woods rustled with unseen life. Somewhere up on the ridge, bobcats moved silently through the underbrush, wild and free. And every so often, when the morning was still and the light just right, they made their way down the hill, through the chokecherry bushes, to a small house at the edge of town, where a golden dog waited at a kitchen window, ready to greet her wild friends with a wag of her tail and a heart full of uncomplicated love.